Welcome to Stats and Scheme with Tage and Shawn. I'm your co-host today, Tage Seth, here with Shawn Syed. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 interesting stats and scheme points from week 2 of the NFL season and what this could mean for the rest of the year. Shawn, which topic do you want to talk about first?
Tage, I would like nothing more than to talk about running the football. When you draw up run plays on a whiteboard, the defense isn't moving, everyone ends up blocked, and there's perfect angles for double teams, and the running back just ends up walking a wide open space. In reality, the defense gets paid too. They're really good. And even if you miss just one block or a defender is able to gain leverage one way, it can ruin the entire structure of the play. So offenses try different things with formations, motions, and adjustments to swap blocking assignments. But the best run games in the NFL have their core concepts and then solutions for different defensive fronts. Now, I'm very partial to the broader Shanahan outside zone tree. And there are 2 concepts I want to touch on really quickly that teams across the league are using pretty heavily in the first 2 weeks. Defenses will use wider edge defenders now, and instead of trying to get outside of them, offenses are finding different ways to block those players out and then create creases inside of them. So we've talked about motion in the passing game last week. We'll talk about it this week. We talked about it on our first show as well, but teams are also using it in the run game. So you'll see a player motion. Sometimes they're right outside the tight end. Sometimes it's a receiver, like for the Ravens, where that player is fast motioning across. It looks like that we're playing in the CFL, but their job is really to kick out that defensive end. Maybe they have a smaller body, but you can use that leverage and use that running start to kick the edge player out and open up vertical space. So one concept is just a variation of counter where that fast motion player is kicking out the defensive end. And then it's usually a tight end kind of from a wing position outside the offensive tackle from the backside that is going to pull up to that linebacker. And since none of the offensive linemen are pulling, which is something you'll usually see on counter, it just lets the whole offensive line wash down the defense with great angles. Teams usually run it from pistol. The 49ers love it. And it lets them have Trent Williams just use all of his strength, all of his leverage. And it usually can end up in big runs with Christian McCaffrey. Then teams are using that same sort of motion to get to a variation of duo. And duo, it's more of an aggressive at-you run. It usually has 2 double teams at the point of attack, but that can change based on the defensive front. In preseason, you'll see it all the time. Teams run it from 2 tight end sets and 3 tight end sets. And a lot of the times, what's meant to happen is the ball will just bounce out to the outside, and the unblocked defensive player will be a cornerback. And on the offensive side, you usually like that matchup when you have your running back and the cornerback in space. Now, duo kick, which that's a term that that Bobby Peters passed down, it uses that same fast motion. You kick out the defensive end. It gives the rest of the offensive line favorable angles to work backwards. The Rams have used it a lot. I think they want to get more aggressive in the run game, be more vertical, as opposed to that stretch and cut mentality of outside zone. The Dolphins and 49ers both use it. So both of those run concepts are something that it's easy to see on the TV broadcast because you have that player motioning so fast at the snap, getting up the field to kick the defensive end. And it's another way to just find different variations of base concepts, change leverage, and attack downhill. So that's where I wanted to get started. Tage, what numbers popped out to you from your research on week 2?
I think the way that you laid that out was really interesting and taught us a lot about what to look for in the run game. And the point that stuck out to me in particular was when you mentioned drawing it up on a whiteboard, envisioning how the run will work out. And we know that Eric Eager, the co-host of this podcast on Mondays and Wednesdays, his research before is perfectly blocked runs only happen 20 to 30% of the time. A play where each offensive lineman or each player in the blocking scheme ends up pushing back their defender or creating the right block. And those rushes are better than perfectly blocked passes, because when a perfectly blocked run happens, that's exactly how the offensive coordinator drew it up. And so you see a higher EPA per rush on perfectly blocked runs than you do an EPA per pass on perfectly blocked passes, which makes intuitive sense. So right now there are 7 offenses in the league that have a positive EPA per rush. When you think about how an expected points model is trained, it's trained on all plays. It takes into account down, distance, yard line, time left in the half, and it says what it thinks the expected points will be based on historical data on the drive that you're on and how many points you're expected to score. And so when you look at only 7 teams in the league having a positive EPA per rush, that's usually pretty standard with what we see in most seasons because running the ball from a yards per play perspective or from an EPA perspective or even a success rate perspective is less efficient than passing. But there are 11 offenses right now in the league that are more efficient rushing than passing the ball this season. That we talked about on last week's show. The offense is just a little bit down in general right now league wide, and a lot of that is stemming from the passing game. When we've seen seasons with a lot of scoring, like the 2020 season, the passing game had this huge boom where every team in the league was able to pass efficiently. But this year, running the ball has been back a little bit in a sense where 11 of the 32 NFL teams are able to sustain offenses where they're able to run the ball. You think about what the Chargers have been able to do this year, being the most efficient run game in the league right now. The Falcons with kind of their two-headed attack with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. And then you mentioned like the 49ers and the Rams, who are also among those teams with efficient run games. So out of some of those teams that have this positive EPA per rush right now, is there one that has stuck out to you in particular on the film?
Yeah, I think that I want to go to the Falcons first. The Chargers, they had that crazy, awesome, I think, run game in week 1. There's a lot of important points I think we can take away from the Chargers. But for the Falcons, scheme is so important. It's in my Twitter handle. I made sure it was in the show title. But, numbers to each side are important, like we talk about on the chalkboard. But it's such a players make plays league. And Bijan Robinson, whatever you want to say about his draft value, we can remove that for now. He is just a player who can make plays. So run concepts where it ends up with an unblocked support player, because the defense has 11 players. The offense has 11 players as well, but the running back can't block because they're carrying the ball. The quarterback is usually or oftentimes not involved outside of a fake. So even if things are really blocked perfectly, it can end up in a one-on-one. And Bijan Robinson is winning those one-on-ones. He has contact balance. He has strength in his lower body and his upper body, where he seems like a contortionist sometimes, where he's able to make people miss while also setting up another move. He has the acceleration to get to the spots that he wants to, but I also think he has the vision that sets up those blocks, where sometimes we think, oh, you need to be fast to play running back, which of course you do, but it's not just about running straight as fast as you can. It's also this really interesting feel thing where that, hey, my blocker is coming from the other side across here. I can be a little bit more patient, and then I can cut and get up the field. And last week, the Falcons, they used a few different variations on their outside zone concepts where they had a fullback cutting some interior linemen. So it felt kind of like a wham concept. They run a counter variation with their center and the fullback. And Arthur Smith, it's got that great look with the mustache and those short sleeves. He just knows how to draw up the run game so well.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought up Bijan Robinson. Like you mentioned, like we talked enough about the draft value, but I don't think there was many doubts in people's mind about how well he would be as an NFL running back. Early on, he's almost exceeded those very high expectations. He was a great prospect coming out of college, ranked top 5 in rushing yards over expected both seasons that he played the majority of the snaps at Texas. And then now he is going to rank top 5 in most of these metrics in the NFL so far this season. 5th in total expected points added rushing the ball, which I think shows just kind of like what he's able to do from a volume and an efficiency standpoint. But what really sticks out to me is we have a yards created metric where it takes into account all the stuff I talked about earlier, down distance, the situation, like all that stuff, and then determines kind of like what is expected out of you and then what the running back does over that. Breece Hall is number 1. Austin Eckler is number 2, but they've both been on limited snaps because of injuries. Bijan Robinson is number 3 right now, just ahead of Christian McCaffrey in yards created over what's been expected out of him at 1.7 yards over expected. So he's doing a great job running the ball from that perspective. And then when you look at him relative to other running backs on his team, right now he is 2.2 yards per carry higher than Tyler Algier and Cordell Patterson combined. So I think and those are pretty good running backs. Like Tyler Algier led the league in EPA per rush last year. So Bijan Robinson being able to go above and beyond that, having a 17% explosive run rate, like all the stuff that he's giving Arthur Smith and this Falcons offense right now is part of the reason why they're 2-0 and why you can expect them to have an efficient run game for a lot of the season.
Bijan also, of course, as you said, with Tyler Algier, he has the benefit that he doesn't have to have 40 carries a game, which of course in the league, that's not the kind of NFL we live in anymore. But having a really good second running back, and then hopefully Cordell Patterson comes back healthy, is another player that's able to get those carries and just lighten that load a little bit, where of course I think the Falcons want to lean on Bijan, but maybe he doesn't have to just eat up the lion's share of the carries. And the Falcons, something that another thing on TV, I think you can see pretty quickly for a really good run game, is how quickly the offensive line is able to get to the second level. So on those double teams, when a guard is releasing to a linebacker, the Falcons have really good guards and they get on those linebackers so quickly. It makes the offensive job so much easier. And the 49ers are another team where they're not the Falcons. They're of course different, but they also have a star running back in Christian McCaffrey, who I think is able to create on his own at certain times. They get on linebackers so quick. It makes the defense's job so much harder because defensive linemen that can eat up double teams where the linebackers are free, that's a lot of the times when you see maybe a run through or just an unblocked linebacker able to make a tackle. But the 49ers, they're probably always going to be the gold standard of the run game to me because of how their base concepts are so adjustable to every single front, but their offensive line blocking stays so repetitious. So as an offensive lineman, you're getting the same reps over and over and over, even when the run concept looks different. And then Kyle Shanahan is able to really marry his run concepts to his play action game, his pass game. And every coach, they talk about, hey, we want to marry the run and pass. We want our run game to look like our play action game. Shanahan is special at doing it. They use the same motions. They use the same unique formations. They use the same actions, and things just keep on building onto each other. And then you have Christian McCaffrey just erasing defenders in open space, combined with something that I love, which is those receivers in San Francisco. That receiving room is clearly taught to block. They're clearly taught that, hey, if you don't put the effort in, it's not going to be a good day for you. So the combination of everything in San Francisco is meshing so well, where I think it's hard to argue that they have to be one of the top teams in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think we talk about like Arthur Smith's vision a lot of what he wanted to get out of this offense. Kyle Shanahan's vision is really coming to fruition here. And it does start with the receivers. I think Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel are amazing in their own right and have been really, really good this year and ranking at the top of most metrics. But leaning on Christian McCaffrey, if your pass offense has an off day where Purdy is missing some passes or maybe the receiver separation isn't as wide as you want it to be, I think is going to be so crucial for this 49ers offense going forward, because they now have 4 or 5 different answers to what defenses throw at them. And I think in previous years, that was like 3 or 4 different answers. So I think Christian McCaffrey, like everything he's able to do from a run perspective, I mean, he leads the league right now in just pure rushes. Like he has 42 rushes overall. Derrick Henry has 40. Tony Pollard has 39. So he's showing that he can handle a full workload, and then obviously leads in rush yards overall, having 266 rushing yards overall. But then, like on top of that, the 1.6 yards created over what was expected out of him it's not like you're giving carries to a running back like Jeff Wilson anymore, who will usually get what's blocked for them. Like Christian McCaffrey can go above and beyond the situation for the 49ers offense, which I think is going to be crucial for them later on in the season, as long as he stays healthy.
And I think we wanted to also maybe just think about other teams that do it in different ways. So you have the outside zone tree that is going to keep passing its way across the league. There's no reason it shouldn't. But we also got to see the Eagles on Thursday night, where that was a really, really unique situation because the Vikings, they were playing the sort of 3-3-5 defense. They were playing pretty light. And the Eagles are so at you and in your face. They have Jeff Stalin, who's one of probably the best offensive line across the NFL. They were running more inside zone. Your guy, DeAndre Swift, just getting downhill and at you. So I think that you had some numbers on the Eagles. We'll talk about those in a second, but it's a different sort of visual medium, pretty much, watching the Eagles run sometimes, because they do a great job. They also have the hive mind between their 5 offensive linemen, where they understand the angles. They understand how the double teams are working, especially when the defense is moving right before the snap. But where the Eagles, maybe they struggled a little bit in the pass game, they're figuring things out on that end. They were able to fully lean on the run game. It was like 14 snaps in a row. I know you were in Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field for that game. How did it feel being there?
I mean, it was great to see this play out. It was you could just really see the offensive line just dominate what the Vikings front were throwing at them. And you mentioned the 3-3-5. That was the big thing that we kept saying in the stadium was like you could just the Vikings just didn't want to give up the deep ball. And they only gave up 2 of them, I believe, to Devontae Smith both times. So in that sense, they were kind of rewarded, but it was just so tough to stop that DeAndre Swift led running attack on Thursday night. And, DeAndre Swift, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, they've all been positive EPA rushers this year. The Eagles as a whole rank 5th in EPA per rush on the season. But to me, the craziest stat is DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell have ran 43 times this season, and 0 of them have been tackled for loss. So the Eagles are just not having negative rushes when they hand the ball off to their running back. Jalen Hurts has had a couple negative rushes himself, but we know how dynamic and athletic he is. We saw that for the past 2 seasons and going all the way back to college. But right now, I think between Swift, Gainwell, and Scott, and then working in Penny at some point during the season, the Eagles have to feel really good about where their running back room is and just how this running back room has been built, where they haven't overspent on draft capital or on free agent extension contracts to get these running backs in there. They bought low on a lot of these guys like Swift and Penny and were able to keep Gainwell around, and they're still just churning out efficient rushing attack because of that.
43 rushes with no tackled for loss that's pretty sweet. That's got to feel good as an offensive coordinator. That combined with if it's 4th and 1, it's 4th and 2, they are special at that push sneak play, which I do want to talk about just for 1 second, because I think other teams have used it. The Colts used it, and then you see some teams at the college level use it, and they're not able to find that same success. So there's the talk back and forth. Should we ban this play? Should we do something to make it illegal in some way or the other? Every team can't just use it. So it's not just, it's like this cheat code that you can press this button. I do think teams should maybe spend more time practicing it, or maybe even have a special player that can do it. But the Eagles are so good at it. So I was concerned, you can just throw anyone back there and have it happen. But that's not it. The Eagles have a special offensive line. They clearly have a practice period that's devoted to it. And then you talked about Hurts in the run game. He struggled a little, maybe not he struggled a little bit. I think the concepts a little bit, those have to be adjusted, but the goal isn't just to get Jalen Hurts sprung free, because they don't have to, and they can just run at you. Even if the quarterback isn't running for 100 yards a game, the quarterback has so much gravity in the run game, which is, I know, something that you've talked about a ton. Every single time he's handing it off, maybe a linebacker or a defensive end, they're hesitating just for a second because there might be a quarterback keep. And that is also another way that offenses are able to open up so much.
Definitely agree. I think that hurts his gravity in that sense. And then like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith's gravity, giving the Eagles lighter boxes. Like you kind of see the year after for the Eagles where they had a very good run game last year, but they were truly built off that explosive passing game, the deep balls to AJ Brown. You think about the 3 touchdowns against the Steelers or what they did to the Giants in the playoffs. And so now the defense has spent the whole offseason planning on stopping that AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts deep ball. And the Eagles' rebuttal to that is to use all these running backs to work in Jalen Hurts eventually and get him going, which I think is really interesting. And as we move on to our next topic here, the Dolphins offense versus the Patriots defense, we can kind of see that push and pull that I just talked about with the Eagles and NFL defenses in this game. What were some of the things that you noticed when the Dolphins went against the Patriots on Sunday night?
We talked about the 3-3-5, which 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. Oftentimes it'll end up being lined up where it looks like there's 5 defensive linemen and just that 1 linebacker. The Vikings used that against the Eagles. Everyone saw it on Thursday. The Patriots ripped it out a bunch versus the Dolphins. I actually thought Bill Belichick had a really, really good game plan. It was encouraging to see. He's so close to that most wins all times list. I don't think he's washed in really in a coaching way, specifically because of this game. They threw all sorts of different coverages. They had 3 high safeties. They rolled to cover 3 with 2 safeties kind of buzzing down on those hashes to take away in-breaking routes that the Dolphins loved with 1 deep safety. They played Tampa 2 variations. They played man. They tried so many different things, and I do think they had some success as much as they could, compress space, put a ceiling over the Dolphins as much as you can when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, instead of making it a foot race. encouraged them to run the ball, where the Patriots with their hybrid players were able to do a pretty good job fitting the run for at least part of the game.
Exactly. I think you summarized so much of what the Patriots defense did well in that game against the Dolphins offense, in a sense where their main goal was to take away Tyreek Hill. And they did that. Limiting Tyreek Hill to 40 yards is about as good as you're gonna do. But it was at the expense of other things, and that's the trade-off that you have to make when you go up against this buzzsaw of the Dolphins offense. So Patriots came out in 3 high safeties, like you mentioned. Mike McDaniel did a great job of being the pass happiest team in the league week 1, and then becoming one of the more run happy teams in the league week 2 because of the looks they got. The Dolphins ended up having a negative 2.9 pass rate over expected. They ran the ball pretty well. You think about the Raheem Mostert deep run or explosive run that ended up closing out the game for them. And then they also were able to use their secondary receiving options well. Even though Tyreek Hill wasn't doing as much from a production standpoint, his second order effects of allowing Jalen Waddle to go off for 86 yards. You have River Cracraft and Braxton Berrios stepping up in big moments. And then the Patriots' secondary goal was to take away the middle of the field passing, because the Dolphins used that 15 times against the Chargers. They only were able to have 2 passes over the middle of the field against the Patriots. And so when you go from the 12.7 yards per attempt you're getting over the middle of the field this season to 8.5 yards per attempt elsewhere, I thought that Belichick did a great job of forcing them to pass that. And the Dolphins were able to do that. But like you said, like the game plan was really sound, and he just didn't have maybe some of the horses on offense to keep up with that.
Defenses, to me, it's more fun to study because of how big of a resource problem it is. You just cannot stop every single thing that an offense does. You can't stop all the pass threats while also having all the resources devoted to the run. And Mike McDaniel was funny at halftime, where I think there's some truth to it. They asked him what he was doing to kind of help the offense, and he just said, I did nothing. It was all the players, which there is some truth to that. But Mike McDaniel, we obviously think he's very special. I think he's setting the pace in the league. Every single time you see that fast motion, it's fun to see what he's doing, because at this point, he's kind of built out an entire offensive play sheet off of just that fast motion to one side of the offensive formation. They ran that deeper dagger concept last week, where you have an inside vertical and an outside dig, where Tyreek Hill has a running start. You got no chance to defend that. This week, they used it a lot in the quick game, where once the defense expanded a little bit, a receiver could go into open space. They used it on another deep shot. They used it on play action. They used it on a screen to Jalen Waddle that was really successful. I think it was on 2nd and 19. And then they also used it in the run game, which maybe wasn't super successful, but now you have that one motion. It's not just a tell that I see Tyreek Hill running outside, I know I'm going to get this 1, 2, and 3 routes. He's able to run his whole entire offense out of one single motion, which is goes back to kind of marrying concepts in the run and pass game, but that's your whole entire play sheet where you have this super threatening motion. I do think Belichick, he tried a few different things where it was a defensive end that was just lined up wider that would press one of the people. So that would kind of interrupt those super quick throws that they were getting to earlier in their game. And that, of course, means if your defensive end is expanded, you have a little bit lighter in the box. If the offense is able to get vertical in the run game, again, it's such a resource problem. You're kind of out of luck. And every week, we talked about the Dolphins last week, talk about them this week. We'll see if they get a full segment every single week. But again, I just think Mike McDaniel is leading the way in the NFL in so many ways, partially because of those players, but partially because he understands how to get those guys into good spots.
Exactly. And, I think about like the people that spend their whole weekend watching football like I do, where it's like you watch college football on Saturdays and receivers are just running wide open. And it's very easy for the quarterback to hit them in a lot of cases, like the Colorado State game that I stayed up until 2:00 Eastern time to watch. Like that was just the common theme of the game was Colorado State kept running shallow crossers and was able to keep picking up first down. Shador Sanders was amazing and was being able to throw to open receivers. And you like switch to the NFL on Sunday and it's such a grind from the offensive perspective. In Chiefs Jaguars, both offenses were grinding. The Jaguars got into the red zone 3 times from what I saw and weren't able to complete a single touchdown pass once they got goal because like the Chiefs defense was tightening up. But then when you watch the Dolphins, they seem like they're a college football offense again, where they're just getting it's like a lot easier for them to get into concepts. And I think Mike McDaniel is doing a really good job. Tua has played better than I think the early season perception of him was, and especially that throw to Braxton Berrios down the sideline in the red zone was like his weekly reminder that he can make some of those throws that we often think of like the alien quarterbacks making. So I think like all of that together is going to make it really exciting for the Dolphins. And when you look at their simulation results that we have on sumersports.com, we run 10,000 simulations of the rest of the season. The Dolphins currently sit at a 70% chance to make the playoffs. They're expected to finish the season with 10.3 wins. And most importantly, a 34% chance of winning the division. Buffalo has a 57% chance to win the division. So that matchup will be really crucial. Do you see the Dolphins as this Super Bowl contender that should be in the top 5, top 10 of teams going forward for the rest of the season? Or are they still kind of outside of the elite group?
I do see them in that elite group. I think the Cowboys are probably the best team in the league. I'd probably put the Niners right there. I think the Eagles are in that range. We can't just count out Pat Mahomes. That would be unfair to everyone to do that. But I do think the Dolphins are showing they have the flexibility to win in a little bit of different ways, where Belichick tried to make it a grind. Like you said, he did what he could to limit explosive plays. But when River Craycraft and Braxton Berrios are the ones that are making plays kind of reliably for the Dolphins, that is so hard. I do think a lot is going to come down to, can McDaniel continue to get that really high level play out of Tua, where there are some throws that the defense will feel comfortable with. The Patriots had that interception on that late developing, super far down the field throw where Tua doesn't have to hit those throws to succeed. We saw him make that kind of throw in week 1, but week 2 was a sort of such a different win. So it's fun to watch McDaniel do it week after week. And I know there was something pretty cool that I think you tweeted it out, where Bill Belichick saw all the fast motion from the Dolphins and his response was to use that kind of motion against the field goal. That was super cool. So I watched that back. They didn't try it earlier in the game. They had something where their kind of edge rushers started outside close to the sidelines. It looked like once the kicker looked down, that's when that edge motion kind of started. And then I put that out, and then some people told me that the holder for the Dolphins, I think he was a former holder for the Patriots. So what a like 6-dimensional chess game that Bill Belichick is playing, that maybe he had a stopwatch out and knew the exact timing. But I'm excited to see high school teams try that out, see how many people just go offside, see if it works. And the Dolphins missed a later kick too, because I'm not going to pretend to study kicker psychology. It seems way too complex. But if I just had a kick blocked and this guy is in my vision running at me full speed, it's hard to say that it doesn't have an impact on you, at least a little bit.
I'm so glad you brought the motion that ended up blocking a field goal and maybe causing another missed field goal, because that was such a masterclass by the Patriots to find a tell that the Dolphins had. I didn't know it was the holder before you mentioned it, but that's really interesting if they knew kind of what their holder's tell was and were able to take advantage of it. And then it was just so cool to see someone go in motion on a field goal block team. And it's like kind of what you do in, I think about like Madden Mobile, where it didn't let you cross the line of scrimmage when you played defense in like the early versions of Madden Mobile. So you could just take your joystick and like your player would just be running on the line of scrimmage line and like have a head start when the play started. And like that's basically what the Patriots are doing, where they just had someone get a head start on that play started. So motion is a lot of fun for sure. On all 3 phases of the game, I guess we're starting to see it, which is pretty cool.
Tej, a great plug for Madden Mobile for you. I can imagine you sitting in your college classes and sitting there playing a little Madden Mobile. And of course, you went to University of Michigan and you were there when Mike Macdonald was there. You guys crossed over when he was the defensive coordinator. He's someone that, unbiased, obviously, for both of us, we think he's going to be deserving of head coaching interviews. the Ravens Bengals matchup. That was a matchup both of us were excited about because of what Macdonald drew up last year. So I might root for Ohio State against Michigan this year, but why don't you start off us? Just talk about some stats, kind of your thoughts on your guy, Mike Macdonald.
Yeah, going into this matchup, I think if the Bengals were playing basically anyone else, I would have expected a huge bounce back from them. Like they're too talented on offense to not have that bounce back from what we saw week one. But Mike Macdonald, who's I think a fantastic defensive coordinator, has kind of owned the Ravens since he's gotten back to Baltimore. So just for people who don't know, 2020 Michigan football goes 2-4 during the COVID season. It's looking pretty bleak there. And Michigan football ends up bringing in Mike Macdonald as defensive coordinator, Matt Weiss as co-offensive coordinator, and they help spurt like kind of a turnaround. Michigan ends up in the college football playoff that season, and Mike Macdonald goes back to the Ravens, where he previously was, to be their defensive coordinator after them and Wink Martindale split ways. So this is the second year as Ravens defensive coordinator. And last season, they played the Bengals 3 times, and then including this last game against the Bengals, they've caused a negative 0.04 EPA per play in the 4 games against the Bengals since Coach Macdonald has gotten back there. That would be equivalent to the 22nd best offense. So the Bengals are basically the 22nd best offense in the league when going against the Ravens. In all other games, they are equivalent to the 4th best offense. They have a 0.09 EPA per play. So 18 spots different when going up against the Ravens defense, but not for the Bengals offense. And he had 5 injured starters on defense in this game, and it looked pretty bleak for them. But they ended up limiting the Bengals' explosive plays. Bengals had a 7% explosive play rate, which was a 22nd percentile performance when you look back on these stats since 2018. So now we can see like his effect on this Ravens game plan. Even though he didn't have all the players that you would expect a starting defense to have, he still was able to put out a game plan that he did multiple times last year where he was able to slow down the Bengals offense.
I love that stat. So you're the 4th best offense when you play against almost all the teams on your schedule, and then you come up against the Ravens and you're the 22nd best offense. That is really, really a testament to a lot of things on the Ravens end, of course. But I like watching when I watch defensive film and I see something and it's just like, oh, this makes total sense why this is happening, why the defense is doing this, why a player is playing a certain technique where it seems like the defensive coordinator or the position coach or whoever's in that building has emphasized this thing to maximize this player's abilities. And the Ravens didn't necessarily win, I don't think, with just a super dominant pass rush. They obviously don't have Myles Garrett in the same way. Jadeveon Clowney actually, I think, played fairly well. But Burrow's lack of mobility, that obviously was a bit of a bummer for the Bengals. I hope he's healthy. It stinks when you have a team that is so good that when we were talking about the best teams in the league, the Bengals absolutely have the ability to be one of those, but it's hard to think about them there if Joe Burrow is just not there for them, which that is rough. I think that the Ravens did a good job taking advantage of that, but they also use different cover 2 variations where 2 invert is something that the Browns used as well, where in your regular cover 2, you have those cornerbacks pressed up on receivers. They're playing the flat and you have a safety over the top on that playing the deep half. 2 invert flips those responsibilities where a cornerback is now playing the deep half. A safety usually is playing that flat area. It can be difficult because the cornerback is jetting backwards. And I'm sure if you look it up on Twitter, you'll see tons of clips of two invert being burnt. But if you understand when to use it, how to use it, it lets you attack that outside receiver if they're trying to throw a screen really quick with the safety. Belichick used different variations of that kind of slice concept against the Bengals last year. And I just love how Mike Macdonald uses Kyle Hamilton. He used him as the middle field player. It's an interesting skill set that is used in different ways. And something more specific I want to talk about. So you have 3-by-1 sets on offense where it's 3 receivers to one side and 1 receiver to the other side. If there's 2 high safeties, what I call the weak safety is just a safety to the 1 receiver side. So the weak safety is a lot of times where a quarterback will look pretty early on, because the weak safety, based on their movement, it sometimes tells you the entire coverage, and studying how a weak safety moves and why they move can unfold a lot of things. The Ravens had that weak safety first look to that isolated receiver on some snaps because they wanted to prevent Joe Burrow just throwing that quick fade ball. And now maybe the safety can't get over there, but early on a red zone throw, Burrow looks to his right, he throws the quick fade, and it looks like the safety is just doubling that receiver to the outside. And that is something that I think led to the interception that happened later in the game, where it is like one of the most awesome defensive plays already early in the season, where the offense has a perfect play called to beat a specific coverage, but then the defense adds one more element, a testament to maybe the player just freestyling. I think a little bit of Mike Macdonald for sure, because they showed it on other snaps. And having coverages that are adjustable based on what the offense presents you is so, so important. I do not know how many times this year I will say, if a defense just stays in one coverage and one alignment, the offense will win. So if you have coverages that are adjustable before the snap, which they did because they were getting to rotated too high looks, and then after the snap based on what the offense is presenting you, that is a special combination that the Ravens have shown.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I like how you mentioned that defense is staying in one coverage is going to be a big advantage for the offenses. On the first show that we did of this podcast, we talked about offensive personnel diversity. The similarity for defenses is coverage diversity, right? Like if you have the players to do so, and you can get into multiple coverages, you're not just sticking in like cover 3 for the entire game. It's such a big advantage for the defense. It really makes the offenses think. And I think that's really interesting. And then the other aspect of this is when you look at quarterback play in the AFC North as a whole right now, Joe Burrow, partly because of injury and what the defense has thrown at him, Deshaun Watson and Kenny Pickett are all bottom 5 in total EPA generated this season. Lamar Jackson is the only quarterback in the AFC North with a positive EPA, and his total EPA rank is 13th out of the 32 NFL starting quarterbacks right now. On the other side of the ball, have you seen anything that Todd Monken has been doing to put Lamar Jackson and this Ravens offense in a good situation?
Todd Monken has been a breath of fresh air for the Ravens. Of course, I do think Greg Roman did a really, really special, unique job with the Ravens in the run game. But now, where a lot of us have said and thought Lamar Jackson has always been good in the pocket, we're able to see that much more. It isn't just a college gimmick offense because Monken was at Georgia, though he was in the NFL before that as well. But it just feels more open, where there's less of those condensed sets. There's more sort of easy button throws where it's based on just numbers and leverage as opposed to, hey, I need to read out the whole entire defense. But then when Lamar does get to those concepts, I put one clip on Twitter where he gets to Mark Andrews late on a third down. He is going through his entire progression. And then instead of just jetting off, he's getting back to a receiver when he feels that open space up, where he has obvious MVP caliber talent. I'm excited for Lamar in that Monken offense to continue to grow together because he is so special. And it's not because, I think I said it before, that I play with the Ravens in Madden, not on Madden Mobile. I use the PS5, Tej. Come on, get at me. But if you have a quarterback where you're able to get more from him, you're able to showcase more of this ability that he has shown previously. So opening up that offense, less those condensed sets, that they will get to those condensed sets, especially in the run game. But I know you're a Zay Flowers guy for sure. I think we both talked about him a bunch over the weekend, where if you have a receiver at that top end, or a receiver that is, I think he is going to be able to get to a specific top end over a few years, it makes life easier on so many other players downstream. Plays can be designed for that player. The quarterback knows, hey, I need a bucket, I can go there. Mm-hmm. The other best receivers are going to receive less attention. So Mark Andrews isn't going to get the same sort of way. And I hope that Zay Flowers continues to succeed. Obviously, you want to see Odell Beckham back there healthy, where it forces defense into a big problem, because if the Ravens are going to spread you out, they have real offensive down the field threats. They have a complete, or they can get to a complete passing game that's going to attack you. And then don't forget about Lamar Jackson back there running on you.
Mm-hmm. I really like what you mentioned there with getting a bucket, right? Like the Ravens' answer to that in previous seasons in the Greg Roman offense, where the receivers weren't as good as receiver cores around the league, was Lamar Jackson scramble or Mark Andrews over the middle of the field. Two answers to getting a first down on late downs. But now they have multiple answers. They have Zay Flowers. They still have Mark Andrews. Lamar Jackson can still run, and Odell Beckham is working his way back. And even Nelson Aguilar has been sneaky good for them so far, which I think has been unexpected. But I do want to talk about Zay Flowers, and I do have some stats on him, but I think like the only way to describe him right now is he's just different. Like he moves differently. He's nothing that the Ravens receivers have been like in the Lamar Jackson era. He has 15 targets already on the season and 78 yards after catch. The rest of the team combined has 84 yards after catch. So he's basically the carrying the team right now in yak. Plus, he was able to add that deep ball against the Bengals where he caught that through double coverage, like giving that vertical element to the offense. So I think there still are going to be some growing pains in this offense as they kind of work through new offensive coordinator, all these new receivers around Lamar Jackson and kind of what they want from him to make sure he stays healthy. But this week 2 against a decent Bengals defense was, I think, a step in the right direction for this is their plan going forward. And like we can kind of see that vision play out.
I love the analysis of quote, he moves different, because that is the, I guess I used a few different words to say that, obviously, for Bijan Robinson. So great analytics from us today saying quote, he moves different, because they really do. And it's cool for the Ravens because that's not something that you've always seen. So when you throw a potentially unique player into that offense, it's really fun. And on both sides of the ball, the Ravens, it's another lazy word, but they just feel more modern, where something that Macdonald does that I like, that we told these offenses, hey, we're going to put 2 high safeties against you. You're going to have to check it down. But the Ravens do a good job of not letting you use some of those checkdowns because they force your running back into pass protection, where a lot of the times the running back is scanning one of the linebackers out to the nickel defender because they would be responsible if one of those player blitzes. And what the Ravens do, and a ton of teams do it, it's not like the Ravens created it. They use creepers or sim pressures, whatever you want to call them, where they're sending 4 people in total on the pass rush, but the 4th rusher is a non-traditional rusher. So it's not someone that's just on the defensive line. So you have one, maybe your defensive end is dropping out and your nickel defender is rushing the passer. Maybe your defensive end is dropping out and then a linebacker is plugging in, where it is a 4-man pass rush, but if you understand the offense's pass protection rules, you can get a linebacker, match up one-on-one with a running back, where on the defensive side, you might feel comfortable with that. Instead of running Roquan Smith into a stud left tackle, you're running him into a running back that, of course, is able to pass protect, but it's still a leverage advantage where you feel comfortable with maybe your rusher can get some sort of rush, get his hands in the face of the quarterback in some sort of way and throw him off his spot. And I keep thinking about the Bengals. You know, a Bengals game was the first game I ever went to, so I do hold them close to my heart. Obviously, shout out McKenna. I know she's a Bengals fan with us as well. I think our simulation had them as something at like a 50-50 shot of making the playoffs. But obviously, you start off, again, I think they were in the division, for game 1 and game 2. They lose both of those games. I do think really highly of Lou Anarumo as a defensive coordinator. I think he's had great defensive game plans over the years, has shown that. But that team really does go as Burrow goes, which makes sense. You're going to go as far as your quarterback can take you. I wonder if he's going to have to miss some games. That's a real bummer. But with the Ravens hitting their stride, there's not a lot of time for the Bengals, I think, luckily they have a longer season, so the Owen Tombstone doesn't just work the same way. They've done it before. They can get back into the playoffs. But man, Burrow's calf, I know that all of Cincinnati is sending the best for his calf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think McKenna would donate her calf so that Burrow could be healthy on Monday night. But the official simulation numbers breakdown is I think like the Bengals, because they started 0-2 in the division, like you mentioned, their chance of winning the division is pretty slim. They sit at 13% to win the division. Ravens are at 57%, so they're more than a coin flip to win it. Browns are at 20%, and Steelers are at 9%. To win the division, but the Bengals still do have a 48% chance of making the playoffs. Browns have a 54% chance of making the playoffs. So you would think it would be one of the two of them there should end up making the playoff, probably depending on who ends up winning their second matchup and is able to stay healthier the second half of the season. So the Bengals season is definitely not over. Like I think that if they get into the playoffs, they can be dangerous like we've seen from them. A lot comes down to this Monday night game against the Rams, where if Burrow's not able to play and you start 0-3 because of that, then you're probably sitting on the outside looking in at the playoffs. But if Burrow does play, takes advantage of a Rams defense that doesn't have talent in a lot of different areas, I think that the Bengals could be sitting at 1-2 and be looking at salvaging their season, much like they did last year after their slow start. So that'll be really interesting to play out in the AFC North. So that's all that we have for this episode of Stats and Scheme. We talked about run games around the league. We talked about kind of how the Dolphins offense was able to beat the Patriots defense and what that means going forward for the Dolphins and their division. And then we also talked about the Ravens coordinators, Mike Macdonald and Todd Monken, how that they've been using some of the pieces that they have on each side of the ball and what that means for the AFC North. So we appreciate everyone listening to this third episode. Please keep the feedback coming in as we continue the show. Make sure to listen to Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitroff on Mondays and Wednesdays, as well as Parker Fleming's show on Thursdays. He is a really cool guest, so definitely be sure to check that out. We will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.